Hiya. I can, yeah. Can you hear me?
We're on.
Can you hear me? Thank you.
My mic was muted for stream. You could hear me, but they couldn't hear me. Hi. Okay, sorry. I just said that I showed you guys a really good video that was on their website's homepage. So we know a little bit about what's going on. I don't know how many of you guys know about rhinos, but I told you a little while ago that I know very, very little besides the research that I've done. But thank you so much for coming on and talking. I know we've been talking over email for a while trying to make this happen, so I'm super excited to learn about all this stuff. And thank you for being flexible, because I know we're on very different time zones here. But
that's fine.
Yeah, but hopefully this works out. So
yeah,
if you could tell us a little bit about you and about the organization to start off, that would be awesome.
Sure. So thank you for having us. So I am Emma Pereira. Yeah, you pronounced it correctly. Well done.
Okay.
And I've been at Save the Rhino. I've been at Save the Rhino for about 18 months. But our organisation in general has been around for 25 years. So we started in 1994. And much of our work has been the same from the beginning to now. So it's all about working with people on the ground. Obviously, we're based in London in the UK, and we have a small team of 9 people. And then we work with programs across Africa and Asia. Programs themselves, they do the work on the ground, and we try and make sure they've got enough funding and resources to do everything that they need to. So we're primarily that organisation that makes sure they have enough uniforms for rangers or tracking devices for rhinos and things like that. They can do all their monitoring and anti-poaching work much more successfully. And there's been a lot of highs and lows in that rhino conservation in the 25 years. But our day-to-day is talking to people about rhinos. So it's good to be here.
Right, cool. So do you guys focus on one of the species or all of them? There are 5, right?
So we focus on the 3 critically endangered species, but our priority, just because of the way that we work and the contacts we have, we work mostly in Africa with black rhinos. But the 3 critically endangered species are the black rhinos in Africa, and then the Javan and Sumatran rhinos in Asia, which I think you mentioned they both have less than 80.
Yes.
Our funding goes towards the black rhino species in Africa, which they sit at around 5,500.
Okay. I learned that I learned that this morning, that there are less than 80. That's individuals in the wild.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's bonkers. There's only about 67 Javan rhinos left, and for Sumatran rhinos, we don't really know the exact number. It's quite difficult to find out. So the situations for each of them are quite different, though. So Javan rhinos, they're actually, every single animal in the species lives in one national park on the western tip of the island of Java. So they're quite at risk of disease or a natural disaster that could wipe the whole species out in one go. Whereas Sumatran rhinos, it's the opposite. So they're all spaced out across quite difficult terrain. They're in forests and jungles a lot, so it's hard to find them. So actually those ones, there's not enough of them together to breed successfully. So they're really isolated in little pockets, and we can't get them to actually breed. They can't find each other. So they're both quite different situations for each of them, and we've got people working on have a successful future.
Okay. Speydra just donated $100 for the rhinos.
Oh my
gosh. Thank you so much. That's so generous. And we got a $5 anonymous donation as well.
Wow, thank you.
That's awesome. So in addition to them having a really hard time breeding on their own in the wild, poaching is a huge problem.
Yes.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So poaching is the bigger problem for the African species, just because of the number of species in Africa. It's a bit harder to find the ones across Asia. So, well, at least those 2 that I was just mentioning. Mm-hmm. So across Africa, on average, 2 to 3 rhinos are poached each day. So when we think about that as our normal sort of day as humans, by the time we're eating breakfast, 1 rhino is killed for its horn, and then sort of mid-afternoon, after everyone's had their lunch, or maybe just before dinner, another rhino has been poached. and then possibly by the time you wake up the next day, another one. So it's like an ongoing of poaching at the moment, and it's really increased because there was a huge rise in demand in around 2008, and it peaked. So there used to be a lot of poaching in sort of the 1970s, 80s, and then it went down. So the start of the 2000s and the end of the 1990s, we actually saw quite a dip, and only about 15 rhinos were poached trees, and that was a really good level considering the issues we'd had before. Right. And then in 2008 it began to spike again, and by 2015 I think it was something like 1,600 rhinos or something in South Africa alone. And then luckily since then it's gone down, so now we're at about 770 rhinos last year were poached for their horns across Africa in total. But the predominant area for poaching is South Africa because they hold about 80% of the world's rhinos. So it's a really difficult issue, and it's one that we're trying to combat with a lot of people on the ground. But yeah, I mean, it is going down, and that's really good, and it is a testament to the hard work of everyone there, and it's working across the chain. So it's not only working to reduce poaching within countries that have rhinos in Africa, but also working to reduce the demand for illegal horn in Asia. So Vietnam and China are the countries highest.
When people are poaching rhinos, I know that it's for the horn. Are there other parts of the rhino that they're poaching for, or is it just for the horn?
It's the illegal poaching of rhinos is just for horns.
Oh my gosh.
When the poaching would happen, I mean, luckily I haven't seen that for myself, but when poaching would happen, poachers would kill the rhino, take the horn, and the rest of the rhino would be left in its place. So nothing else is generally getting taken. So it is literally for the horn.
That's horrible.
Of keratin, so it's the same as our fingernails and our hair.
Jeez. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, you said it's thanks to the hard work of people that have been working against this. What exactly is it that you guys have done, that other organizations have done, to stop poaching?
So a lot of it is working with guys on the ground, women and men, to actually increase monitoring of the locations that rhinos live in and increase securities of those specific areas. So you can imagine the difficulties in terms of that increase in number of poached animals, that rhinos now are kind of fenced into most conservancies and national parks, because the risk of them being poached is so high that they're generally not able to just kind of go. So within each of those places will have anti-poaching units, and sometimes there's canine units within those. So we have dog squads, as we call them. And what we do at Save the Rhino is make sure that they've got the right equipment and the right ability to actually they need to do in terms of patrolling. So things as simple as boots for rangers. Recently, and it's not easy ground that you're just walking around. It's tough, long days. It can be cold nights, and these guys can walk, 30 kilometers every single day, 20 to 30 a day. You need some good boots that work for a long period of time that people are walking out there. So one grant for us could be giving boots to people. About having good home comfort, so people in ranger situations. So when a ranger is out, they tend to be out on essentially for a few weeks at a time, and then they'll go and see their family later on. So they could be essentially in the field for 3 weeks. Obviously they'll be coming in and out of being actually walking around doing those jobs, but that means that they need good places to live and nice places to have at home, rather than just there's kind of a blanket and a floor. So we try and make that more comfortable, and then that increases their motivation to do the jobs properly and do it well. Because what we used to find there can be a lot of corruption in these areas. So if you motivate people to really want to do their job and understand the reasons why, then we have fewer instances of corruption, and then we can protect more rhinos. So it is really about getting those people to see a rhino, once a week, and they know it's there and they can log all of that activity, and then they've got all the systems in place to have everything known. So the security operations are huge. So that's mainly what we focus on.
Okay. Cody just tipped $100 and Peepo Pog with $50. Thank you guys so much. That was so quick. Thank you.
Generous. Thank you.
Yeah, that's nuts. Sorry, I lost my train of thought because of that. You mentioned grants. So while people are donating, we're at $255 already.
Oh my gosh.
What do these donations go to for your organization?
Yeah, so literally the stuff I was talking about. Mm-hmm. So for like $15, you could buy a good, decent pair of boots. Mm-hmm. For $100, you can buy a rhino tracking tag that goes into the rhino's horn, and then it can be monitored through GPS tracking with the rangers when they're out every day.
Oh, great! Yeah.
We can buy things like mattresses, things like tents as well, good uniforms. Really simple, but stuff that people in the field need is good uniforms that are lasting, because it's really easy to get a hole in something or to be wearing something for 3 weeks and need something new. So
right.
So we often have to do that, but we work at a strategic level at the same time. So we've got, and in the next couple of months, actually talking about range expansion where we can connect habitats together. So we work with teams on the ground to talk to local communities, increase the with people that are living next to parks and reserves, so that everyone is conservation, not just rhinos in the world, but we want everyone locally to actually know that that is a huge benefit, and for them to understand why that is and how they can help as well. So we work on lots of different project communities as well.
Okay, Super Genius donated $77 and Oz with $5. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
There was a question in chat for you. He said, does the government help them with supplies or with funds, or?
Yeah, so it depends on the country. So I couldn't give you a specific example because I don't know all the policies well enough, but different countries will have different abilities to fund programs. So they might fund different things to us. They might fund the actual salary of a ranger for some programs, or they might give grants to for specific projects that they do, and it will really depend on what that country's focusing on and what their government wants to do in the country. So yeah, it'd be different from sort of Kenya to South Africa. It can change a lot.
Okay, the sniper just donated $100.
Wow.
That you guys are crazy today. Oh my gosh.
Wow.
Okay, so let's backtrack a little bit to there are 3 species that are endangered.
Okay. Critically endangered. Yeah.
What are those species? And you mentioned the names, but could you tell us a little bit more about the individual species, like where they are and the difference between them? And
yeah, sure. So I'll actually start with all 5. So
okay.
If we go to Africa first, we have the white rhino and the black rhino.
Sure. Okay.
Those 2 names are not reflected in the color of the rhino's skin, so you're never actually going to see a white rhino or a black rhino. They have the same color; they're kind of a gray. But the name white, we think, originated from a word that was wide, because white rhino has a wide mouth. It has a bit more of a square lip. Okay. And then it kind of got translated over years to become white, and then the black rhino was known as black rhino. So there are around 18,000 white rhinos in the world, but all of those, pretty much bar 2, are the southern white rhino subspecies. So the northern white rhino subspecies, which people might have heard about a couple of years ago, the last male Sudan died. They only have 2 females left, and they're both in Kenya.
Oh my gosh.
So
okay.
Basically, you'll never see those in zoos or anywhere else. That it's only ever, if you see a white rhino in a zoo or across the world, you're pretty much looking at a southern white rhino.
Okay.
And they're kind of spread across Africa at the moment, mostly southern Africa. In terms of black rhinos, again, at the moment, the ranges are similar because of how much the populations have decreased over years, but they would have been different before. So they would have been in certain areas in Africa. Now, black rhinos are seen in Kenya and in South Africa as well. So it's a bit of a mix. Okay. But yeah, there are about 5,500 of those, and there are 4 different subspecies. I don't know the exact numbers of those subspecies, but they're not as few as the 2 of northern white rhinos, sorry.
Okay.
But yeah, they're in Africa.
Raven and then if we go, excuse me, sorry, Raven Care with $100 also.
Wow, thank you.
So that's $537. He said 5 tracking tags.
Oh my gosh,
that's very
amazing.
Cool, Raven. Thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so black rhinos. Is that
yeah? So Yeah, so black rhinos, again, across Africa, about 5,500 of them. And they've increased. I mean, both of those species have increased massively in the last few years. I'll talk about that in a little bit.
Okay.
The Asian rhinos, so we have 3 species in Asia, which a lot of people tend to not know much about at all. And I think it's just that those 2 species because they're more numerous.
Mm-hmm.
But Asian rhinos, we have the greater one-horned rhino, or some people know them as the Indian rhinos, and they are in Nepal and India, kind of at the base of the Himalayas.
Okay.
3,500 of those, and you can actually go and see them in national parks and things. As an Asian rhino, you actually can see, whereas the other 2, there's very few people that have ever seen them in the wild. The 2 are the Javan and Sumatran rhinos, and those are the ones we were saying earlier have less than 80. So Javan rhinos, individuals in a park called Ujung Kulon National Park on the tip of Java, and then Sumatran rhinos, less than 80. Some reports say around 30 Sumatran rhinos in a few different locations. So we support one looking at bringing them all together, which is in Waikambas National Park on the island of Sumatra. But there is one last Sumatran rhino in Malaysia, Iman, a female, and then there are a couple kind of dotted around in Indonesian islands around there. So it's quite tough for those guys.
Okay. Somebody asked, is the story about an organization taking rhinos and dyeing their horns pink to prevent poaching real?
So there are organizations that do that. Well, not organizations that do. There is a program that people try and dye rhino horns or add chemicals in rhino horns to try and deter poaching. What we found is it's not always that successful because it doesn't always deter poachers from the off, and rhino horn can be ground down when it's later. So it doesn't always actually stop poaching happening. And especially if it's a chemical that can be poisonous to humans, then actually issues around how you would actually deal with that. It's not always that positive, but and people do it, and some people say it works, but there's research is controversial.
Right. Somebody also said, why don't they remove the horns from the rhinos so poachers have no reason to poach?
Yeah, so some people do. So that's called dehorning, and different programs will have their own policies on it. We have some places that we support that do dehorn, other places don't. And again, it's up to those specific programs to see what they think is successful. But with a rhino's horn, it tends to grow back every 2 to 3 years. So what we do know is that it's quite an expensive process because you have to, first of all, find the rhino. If it's a black rhino, they tend to be a little bit harder to find because they tend to live within bushes. They tend to be a little bit more isolated. So you've got to find the rhino. You're probably using a helicopter or an aircraft to use that, to find them, and then you need to dart the rhino, so it's going under anesthetic. Then you've got to have a team and then a vet and do all the monitoring, and store the horn afterwards. So process it, most places do it now to deter poaching, but it's an expensive and regular process to do, so it's not always the kind of success that people might want it to be. Unfortunately, there's no one thing that we can do that will stop poaching overnight, unfortunately. So it's just
right. Another really, guys, these are really great questions. Another question in chat is there anything you have to do to prevent genetic defects due to inbreeding since the numbers are so small?
That's not something that we actually work with, but there are definitely people working on that. So there are people working across the world with the 2 northern white rhinos to try and artificially breed them now. So there've just recently been embryos created of that subspecies, and it's just working out how that can be done successfully so it doesn't inhibit the species in the future. You know, is that the southern white rhino, which is now 18,000, they actually, in the kind of end of the 1990s, there were only about 100 of them left, and now they've gone up to that 18,000 mark. So you can have a very few number of individuals and really increase population size successfully. But obviously that was still with 100. That with at least some good genetic diversity.
Yeah.
And the kind of limited stock essentially of genetics that you have, that can be a bit tougher, but and the priorities for that.
So do you guys work with zoos and organizations that are focusing more on genetics and doing breeding and stuff like that?
So we don't actually work on genetics and artificial breeding, mainly because our priority is increasing rhinos in the wild.
Right.
So we try and make sure that we don't have to get to that stage. So we basically choose to work with populations that are what's called viable, which tends to be around 20 individuals plus, and then we make sure they never get down to being any lower than that. But there are organizations in the US, in Germany, Italy, and Kenya and the UK that all work to actually promote that and try and get for the northern white rhinos. So we work with other zoos in the UK and across Europe, and doing things like the grants that we just spoke about. They fundraise with us, and they've raised an incredible amount of money over the last few years on that project.
I saw an article on your website this morning of I think there were black rhinos, like 5 that just got moved from a zoo in the UK to Rwanda. Do you know what I'm talking about? News.
So actually that wasn't something that we worked with, but it was a really exciting story. So there were I think in that specific one there were 3 zoos across Europe, one in UK, and I can't remember the last one was, and they successfully translocated 5 rhinos, I think, from zoos back to Rwanda, was it? Yeah. So project, because it's really difficult to translocate rhinos because of obviously they're a big animal, especially you're going in planes, you've got a lot to deal with, the anesthetic issues,
right.
So it's a real big feat to actually do it successfully, and they managed to, and I think those rhinos seem to be settling in quite well, so it's really positive.
That's awesome. There was another guy chat with like actually wonderful questions today. Remy asked a little bit earlier, is the population decrease, is it mostly due to poaching, or is habitat loss a big issue too? And Celeron with $50. Thank you so much. And we reached $600. We're at $608 in donations today. Thank you so much. Yeah. So how much does habitat loss contribute, or is it mostly poaching?
Yeah, so I hope you can still hear me. I think I've kind of lost you. But that's a great question, because you're so right. It's habitat loss as well as poaching. Okay. So poaching obviously really affects the African species, but habitat loss for the other 3 in Asia is really tough, and also habitat loss for the ones in Africa. So that's one of the reasons that we're working to increase habitat and range in the specific program in Kenya, because we're trying to get lots of connected habitat so then people can moving from one location to another rather than just kind of staying in one place, because then what we can't do is increase the population any further. So we've kind of
that is the first time that this has happened. I'm sorry, your video just cut out. Let me call you back. Dang it. She said no and left. Wait. Hang on. Oh, it switched. Wait. She's in London. I have it on US East. Right? Is that okay? Or should I put it on Europe? Hi.
Hi, sorry.
No worries, that's okay. You're back.
I don't know what that was. I can't remember where exactly I got to.
Oh shoot.
It was habitat loss. It was a great question. It was a great question.
Habitat loss, yeah.
Yeah, so totally right. Great question. Habitat loss affects all 5 species. So in Asia, it's more specific because they're in such small locations. So we really need to get some more habitat to expand into, and then the populations we hope can try to increase. And there's a lot of work going into finding new habitat to actually get those species into.
Right.
The same thing actually in Africa. So we're trying to connect more habitats together. Basically, if we don't have increasing locations of habitat, then we get to something called the carrying capacity of that specific area. And when that happens, we can't increase the number of rhinos there because they just won't successfully breed and grow in the same way. So you can only grow a population to a certain extent if you're in a small area. Right. You know, it's like any other animal. If you put too many in one place, then there's going to be a point where they can no longer just keep growing. You can't kind of keep them together tightly squished up. It's not going to work that way.
Right.
So definitely an issue, and it's all about finding the right places that we can work together with as well. So the great thing about rhinos is that they're what's called an umbrella species, which means that every time you protect rhinos, because they need so many other sort of elements of a habitat, they actually help to increase other elements of wildlife. So increased diversity of plant species because they're browsers or grazers and they eat a certain thing. They have a bird called an oxpecker that actually helps a rhino by reducing the insects in their skin, but it means that those insects the birds eat. So that's already helping that species of bird. Like dung beetles and everything else. They're an umbrella species and they really help every other bit of wildlife in that environment. So it can be really helpful to expand those places. And it's finding the right time. It's timing as well. It's not just about, okay, we've got this place, we need to do it, but we need to get that area ready. So we need to work with the management there and the communities there and say, okay, is it secure enough? Do we have relationships with everyone here? Can we get a team that works out how the rhinos are doing? Can we keep monitoring their health? How's the water system? Unfortunately, at the moment, there's quite prolonged droughts in places like Namibia and South Africa, and that's affecting rhino populations as well. So there's quite a few elements that go into the populations, but they are increasing at the moment. So they're not going down. But it was poaching, I think, especially for the African species in the kind of 70s and 80s that really, really took the populations down. So just taking black rhinos for an example, there were about 65,000 of them in their sort of 60s. And then that went right down to 2,000-ish in the 1980s. So it was a dramatic fall. And, you know, since then we've doubled the numbers, and that's really successful. So
right. Benassi with $50, Dud with $5, Uber with $5, and Celeron with another $50.
Wow. Thank you.
Actually, so generous, so nice. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Thank
I
you.
keep losing my train of thought when that happens. It's actually that's incredible. How did you get into rhinos? What's your background? How did you fall in love with rhinos?
So I don't know if you saw on our website, we have a rhino costume, or we actually have 16 of them. Okay. And I can send you photos and things later, but in the UK and in London, we have our London Marathon every year. It's a really big charity event, and Save the Rhino, since we began, has had these rhino costumes, and they're originally made for the theatre. So these really sort of big, bulky, crazy looking costumes. They look a little bit like the holiday armadillo on Friends.
Okay.
When Ross wore that in the Christmas episode, but they've got a big horn and things like that. So basically that helps us really raise awareness. And when I first saw those when I was younger, I'm a runner as well, and I love running. So I used to see that run in the London Marathon every year, and I just thought it was really cool. But I actually went to university to study marine biology.
Okay.
And then I decided that I wanted to get into work a little bit earlier than continue those studies. So I'd finished my degree, but I didn't go on any further. And I started working originally in environmental policy, but I always knew that I wanted to work for Save the Rhino because rhinos are just incredible animals. They're just so iconic. I've always kind of had a soft spot for rhinos, and there's something about them that they're really tough and hard looking, and they look a little bit prehistoric, but actually like the calves are adorable. If you ever see a rhino calf picture, it's just the cutest thing ever.
Yeah, do. They're so cute. Oh my goodness.
They're so sweet, and they are caring animals, and they're not horrible or rough in any way, but I think sometimes they get portrayed that way. So there's something just so lovely about them that completely, I just love them every time I see a photo. And then I was lucky enough to secure a job at Save the Rhino, and then now I look at rhino photos every day. So
yeah, that's so cool. So your role, you're communications manager. Is that right? Okay. The communications piece in conservation is so important. That's I started here on Twitch about anonymous with $100. Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
That's actually
Everyone's being
unbelievable.
so generous. Thank you
Oh
so
my
much.
gosh. I started
Um,
on Twitch about, what was it, guys, like 7 or 8 months ago. Um, and spreading information like this, I'm so grateful for you being on this podcast, because I've learned so much. I mean, I knew that I knew that there were rhinos that were endangered, but I did not know the half of it, and I don't think that people in chat knew either. So it's so important to be able to teach people about stuff like this.
yeah, and as you say, it's so important because there's so much kind of research and science that goes into a lot of conservation work, and most people that work in conservation that I've met along the years have definitely been from that scientific background. And sometimes when you get your head in that detail, it's hard to translate that into information and stories that people can really understand. So that's
Absolutely.
such a big part of what we try and do at Save the Rhino, bring it into people's lives, and how can people actually understand what that means, that, and that's why we talk about rangers so often, because it's their lives too. That's their job every day, is to protect these animals, and a lot of time they love it, but it's really tough, it's dangerous. There's stats, unfortunately, like 1,000 rangers died in the line of duty in the last 10 years, and
In the
those
line
sorts
of
of things mean that we,
like wildlife
yeah, in the line
related
of
deaths,
duty,
or
the range. So some are wildlife related, some could be poaching related, some could be there's loads of other things that could happen. But they're
wow.
literally walking around, so it could be things like, unfortunately, they come across an elephant, and they're in big five country, so elephant, rhinos, cheetahs, lions, buffalo, and it's not an easy job to do, and it's long hours and away from your family a lot. So that's one of the reasons that we really talk about rangers and we promote what they do so much, because that's more the human element of this conservation issue as well. So it's not just about protecting the rhinos, but it's actually about saying who are looking for them better,
Right.
because they do the most crucial job.
Somebody in chat asked, what is being done to educate TCM practitioners about the results of using rhino horns?
Okay, yeah. So traditional Chinese medicine.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a cultural thing, and
Okay.
it really is about changing behaviour across the years. So basically, for thousands of years, rhino horn has been used in traditional Chinese medicine, and there's hundreds of thousands of different ingredients in traditional Chinese medicine, and there are beliefs and real into why those ingredients are used. There's not always a lot of research to back it up, but it doesn't mean that it's not true. So it's something that people do every day, and it's a cultural thing. So there are people that work with practitioners directly to say what are all the alternatives. We actually work a lot of our campaigns. We work with organizations on the ground to change the consumer behavior. So we had a campaign called the Chi campaign in Vietnam, and Chi in Vietnamese means strength from within. So we were talking to people about the fact that rhino horn isn't something that you need for yourself to bring you strength or to bring you success. Actually, you've got that yourself, and you can do all of that in your business success or your family success and your wealth. Rhino horn is something that you don't need to use that, and actually it has a kind of different message if you're using it. But we actually spoke to a Vietnamese traditional Chinese practitioner, traditional Chinese medicine practitioner, sorry. And he was one of the leading practitioners in Vietnam at the time. And he was saying that there's so many alternatives to use rhino horn that are plant-based, and different herbs and medicines that he wouldn't ever, offer out as a kind of general medicine.
Right.
And actually it's very expensive. So it's one of the most valuable illegal wildlife trade products. And that means that if most people are using a traditional Chinese medicine doctor, they're not just able to freely get rhino horn. It doesn't work that way. So we wouldn't be able to go to the doctors for either, because it is still an illegal product and it's very expensive. So it's used by certain segments of society, and they tend to be people with very good connections, and that's where we need to change the behavior. So not only of the practitioners but also of the end users a little bit more.
Right. Okay.
And it's a cultural thing. It's like getting everyone in Britain to stop drinking tea, sort of culture ingrained.
Yeah, so
It's an ingrained thing.
The horns themselves, they're primarily for medicinal purposes, or also like aesthetic. I wasn't sure.
A bit of both. So The use in Chinese medicine has decreased over the years, I think, as public perception has increased and the value of it has increased a lot.
Okay.
But what we've seen has increased in the last decade or so, maybe a little bit longer, is the of rhino horn. So it's not just about using it to yourself or something like that. It's actually about saying, I've got a piece of rhino horn that makes me this really significant person. I've got a lot of status, I've got a lot of wealth, or sometimes given as gifts as well. So if you want promotion at work, giving your boss a bit of rhino horn, or a wedding gift or things like that. And that is now the area that things are moving into, especially with the increasing kind of middle class society in some of those countries.
That's so bizarre.
So it's now, yeah, it's a kind of, it's really hard for, I guess, for us to understand because we don't see rhinos in that way. But in Vietnam and China, that is how it's viewed. So it's about educating right from the beginning in terms of school children and that age, but also then going into government and working on policies and working on, you know, high net worth individuals, business people, successful businesses, and saying you don't need this as an ingredient, you don't need this as a symbol of status.
Right. So that education piece is super, super important.
Cool. Yeah, it's all about changing that behavior and that cultural mechanisms.
Right. Joe Kid tipped $100 and Mevin tipped $20.
Thank you.
Wow. We're at $938. That's absolutely unreal. Guys,
oh my gosh.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's insane.
So
Thank you.
That is so crazy. Yeah, going back a little bit, there's a quote, and I always say it's my favorite quote, but I always mess it up. It's something along the lines of we love what we know and we protect what we love. Right. So teaching people, and that, you know, when they, sorry, I'm super off the rails right now because of the donations. I'm just like so blown away. Yeah, when teaching people and getting people to care about it, it's I think having Twitch as a platform, especially because the demographic of viewers on here is younger, and reaching younger kids. Like for you, I think your story about the rhino costume was so cool, because when you're young and you get impressions like that, it's really important, and it lasts a long time.
Definitely.
Yeah, so reaching the younger generation is important. And also, conservationists and biologists that I've talked to, like you said, the density of information, because they're so bright, right? And they have such dense, detailed information. It's not always accessible. So that's why I love things like this, right? Just like casual conversations, talking about the basics. Too. And me too.
Really, it's all about expanding that reach and getting the message to people who wouldn't have necessarily heard it before.
Right.
Because if you look at a lot of people that have studied or that work in it, obviously they tend to know the issues, even if they aren't working on that specific program at the time, but they tend to know about what's going on. And actually, it's not those people that we're talking to, so we need to change our languages. And that's what I love doing, and love working online and looking at digital areas that we can get into, because that's where we can actually really connect with people more now. We've got these amazing reach and these amazing platforms that we can work with, and we can get the message out to so many more people that would just not have heard about it before, or not have maybe heard about it but not understood the detail behind it. So even like your audience saying that it's not just about TCM, it's actually about animals and wealth. That's so critical to share with everybody, and that a lot of Chinese practitioners aren't saying, yeah, we need to use rhino horn all the time. It's not as simple as that. And now hopefully that we've got that.
Yeah.
We've shared that message in this podcast as well.
I forgot there was another question in chat a little bit ago, and this may be opening up a can of worms, but they asked about artificial insemination, and if that's possible with rhinos. I think I was reading up on, I was just at the San Diego Zoo this past weekend, and I know that they've done some AI with, I think, white rhinos, but it may be black rhinos.
So they do AI with southern white rhinos. They can't do it with northern white rhinos just because of the issues around only having two left, and those two, while they're females, they're not able to reproduce successfully due to reproductive tract issues and other reasons. But they have, I can't remember exactly if they've actually had a calf born from artificial insemination, but I know that they definitely had a pregnancy started. I don't know if that was at San Diego or another zoo. San Diego does a lot on reproductive strategies, so there is AI that goes on, and it's just working out. There's a lot to think about in any animal when you do AI, but it's about, can the rhino carry the pregnancy to full term? Are they in good health themselves, and where is the genetic coming from? So rhino pregnancies, I think, are around sort of 14 to 16 months.
Okay.
It's a long time,
and they have
that female has to be healthy.
They have one calf always, or do they sometimes have twins?
Yeah. I've only ever heard of one calf. Yeah,
okay.
I think twins is not ever happened as far as I'm aware.
Okay.
Definitely not in captivity. And then they wouldn't have another calf for about 4 years. So calves stay with their mums for about 2 to 3 years. So then by the time they kind of come back into season and they're ready to be pregnant again, it's probably maybe 4 to 5 years even before they have another calf, actually.
Okay.
So this rhino reproduction is quite a long process, which is why it also takes more time to build up populations. So we can't just say, okay, we're going to stop poaching and start the increase in population again. It's actually, okay, we're going to slow poaching right down and stop it as much as we can, but we need to kind of be driving up populations at the same time, which is, we're lucky that some places are really good at doing that.
Right. There was one question that I was trying to hold on to here. Oh, it was not a question. You guys kept saying AI. Guys, for clarification, AI, artificial insemination, is what I'm talking about. Not
Sorry.
Robots.
That's me too.
Okay, so we got about 10 minutes right before we're gonna close up here. Would you mind just saying like what your day-to-day is like with your job, for those of you in chat that are interested in conservation or into going into working with animals? What does a day look like for you, and what's your favorite part about it? And
Sure. So my day-to-day, obviously we work in London, our office is in London, so commuting is a big part of that day. But in terms of actual work, one of the main things for me is working on our digital areas. So I work on our website, and I make sure that our platforms are all working correctly, and that we're able to thank every one of you that just donated and everyone else that donates to us, and do that successfully. It's also about updating, so we get news articles or stories from the field. We talk to our program managers, and then we might write a blog on that, or might be creating a video on something. So actually, I have quite a digital role, and then things also can come up in the news. So we could have something like artificial insemination as well in terms of reproduction. If a news story breaks, that's part of my job to write up our statement, talk to members of my team, and work out what we need to do next and where we're going to go with the story. So sometimes we might get asked to go on to like national TV or radio interviews, and that will be me and some of my colleagues working on that together to see what we can say, what our messaging needs to be. Working on, as I said, photos and videos and things like that, making sure that we've got everything up to date online, updating all of our social media profiles and making sure that everything is on there for everyone to see, responding to any comments that people have or questions in our inboxes on those. And then some of my colleagues' day-to-day is more about talking directly with the programs and making sure that they've got everything they need from us. So when I spoke about our grants at the start of the podcast, we have grant projects with certain people. So they might say to us they need a certain amount of uniforms or boots, or they need to increase the number of rangers in a certain area, and then we can get a report back on that about what they need to do. So we have kind of grant applications and grant reports to work on. Other than that, it's also about strategy for the future. So at the moment, we're working on what the next few years are going to look like for us at Save the Rhino and where we want to move into. So a lot of that is about looking at trends in the charity sector as well. So our non-profit for you guys in the US. So we look at what's going on in the rest of the world for non-profits, and how can we do better in what we do. And with a team of 8 in total, obviously that's quite a lot to do. So we kind of work together and we all chip in on a lot of things. So some days I could be working with our intern on the London Marathon and trying to get people into costumes, and it's quite a varied role.
Yeah, you do a variety of things for sure. That's very cool. Giddy tipped $51.20 to reach our $1,000 donation goal.
Oh wow!
And Hunt I assume at the same time donated $51.20 to do the same thing. And Drader with $3, so that we're at $1,054, guys. Thank you so much.
That's awesome.
That's
so awesome. Thank you.
And then Drader tipped $3 and asked this may be the last question, said, is biotech companies flooding the market with artificially grown rhino horns a viable option in the future?
Yeah, so that started a few years ago, actually. There's a couple of companies that are working on products that are artificially made.
Okay.
From what we understand, the difficulty comes around, so the international trade in rhino horn is illegal.
Right.
So to then kind of flood the market with an artificial product makes it, especially if it was really similar to rhino horn, makes it really hard for enforcement agencies to do their job correctly in terms of which is not, where do we need to regulate the trade and things like that. So there's a lot of things to work out in terms of regulating that trade. But also from a user perspective, when there have been surveys carried out, want the real thing.
They want the real thing? Okay.
Yeah, and they want wild rhinos as well. So it's not so easy to say, because you can kind of more intensively manage rhinos, especially white rhinos, and breed them a little bit quicker and keep them in smaller areas.
Right.
It wouldn't be the same as a kind of intensive farm, but you could do that. And just a point to users not wanting that anyway. They want wild rhinos because of the cultural beliefs of why it's used and how it's used and what the that means that they kind of want the strongest element of it's got that strength of use. So the medicine is going to be, it's quite hard to fully understand it, I guess, because you can't just do it. You can't just flood the market with it.
Right.
But the research at the moment points to it being really difficult to do so, and you'd have to regulate it really carefully. And at the moment, the systems just are not there to do that. So there'd be a lot of planning and preparation before that could happen. Thing in the future, we'll have to wait and see. But hopefully what we can do is actually increase rhino populations enough so that never matters, and poaching we can get down to an absolute zero.
Right. Okay. Welsh Nerd tip $30. Thank you, Welsh. And then last thing, have you ever done anything in the field? Like, have you seen the rhinos that you work with, or do you hope to, or work for, I mean?
So I was really lucky recently to go out to Kenya. So we actually, so a lot of our sort of the way we were founded was about endurance events. So our founders actually did a motorbiking event across Africa, and then they sort of climbed Kilimanjaro, and now the London Marathon is our of the year. So we're very kind of running and endurance focused as a charity for our fundraising.
Right.
And this year we held our second ever ultra marathon in Kenya, which is about 230 kilometers in 5 days across Kenya in some of the conservancies that we work with. And I was really lucky to be out there, not running it, but doing a lot of the work with people that were running it for us, and talking to the rangers and spending some time with them, understanding what their roles are like and what their day-to-day is like. So it's like, yeah, very lucky enough to see some rhinos out there, and
cool.
Everyone's doing it's a full-on difficult operation to keep them safe and to keep all the runners safe as well, because they were just in these incredible places and they had to be protected from all the wildlife. But yeah, seeing that was incredible. If anyone ever gets the chance, I would to do something that makes you see that bit of wildlife that you love, because it is just an awesome,
it really makes it, doesn't it?
Awesome time.
Yeah,
it really does. And it's great to see animals in zoos when you love them and you can see how they react and you can actually see them up close. But I think there's something about seeing them in their natural habitat, it makes it all right.
Yeah, I agree. I've definitely had that experience also.
Yeah.
Okay, last thing here. I'm gonna send you this. Let's see if this goes through. I just messaged it to you. Here's a little thank you card.
Thank
for
you.
being on the podcast today. Citrus, thank you for making this, as always. You're wonderful. I appreciate that. And Wolf, thank you for the sub. Let's see. Did I just? Oh. Okay. Very cool. So I'll tweet that out. I did a tweet and tagged you guys. But I'll put that in the comments of it. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, or questions, or anything before we close up here?
Sorry, you're kind of breaking up a little bit. Hopefully you can still hear me.
I can hear you.
I just want to say a big thank you to everyone for donating, and for you for having me on this podcast. And also that just a date for everyone's diaries next year. I know when we originally wanted to do this chat, it was going to be around World Rhino Day, which is the 22nd of September. So obviously that's just a couple of weeks ago, but yeah, next year, 22nd of September, it's it's an annual event, and it's not one that we actually began, but it's a great day just for everyone to share, raise awareness of rhinos and why they're so important for us to keep in the world, I think. So just to plug World Rhino Day a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's what I said before, guys. We've been talking for a couple weeks because I noticed that and I was like, I gotta get someone to talk about rhinos. That's so cool. And this was wonderful. This was so much great information. Thank you so much. And we ended,
you're very welcome.
In donations today at $1,084.20. So
oh my gosh,
absolutely insane. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate you guys being here. The questions today, you guys, were so good. Like, these are the best questions that I've ever had on a podcast. It was awesome. And you answered them so well. So thank you so much for doing that.
Oh, well, it's easy when there's good questions.
Yeah, no kidding. They were really good, you guys. I was really, really impressed. Okay, well, Emma, it was so nice to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. And thank you for being flexible with your time. I'm glad that this worked out for both of us.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I'll send you an email and we'll look forward to World Rhino Day next year. Maybe we'll do something again.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, have
Bye.
a good night. Bye.